All right, everyone. Welcome back to Hey Huzi. I am your interim host for the time being, Mona Bolsey. This is episode 4. Today we're talking about AI and education, one of the most important, potentially transformative applications of this technology, at least in my opinion as a father, and how we should be teaching it in a world where AI can sometimes be elusive, perhaps not the right way to go, or we don't have the correct parameters to be able to instruct it how we need to, and to be able to educate our kids what happens to learning when AI can do your homework, and how do we prepare them specifically for AI in the future, and what specific modalities we're supposed to implement. So Eric Post is back. Welcome, Eric. What's up,
What's
man?
up? How are you?
Happy to have you. For those just jumping on for the first time, Eric's the founder and CEO of Huzi.ai, and today we're exploring on how AI is changing everything about really what we learn in tech. If you're an educator, if you're a parent, if you're a student, if you're just care about the future of learning, this episode's crucial. So let's just dive right in. All right, Eric, man, I want to talk about the current crisis. And I call it a crisis, and I use that word specifically because if AI can do your homework, if it can write these essays, if it can solve your problems, if it essentially can allow you to cheat on exams, is it breaking education?
Thank goodness. No, it isn't
Yeah.
breaking. Okay, so I didn't know exactly where we're going to go with this today, and I didn't know exactly what you're going to ask me, but I want to premise this whole thing saying that when I have any sort of criticism around public education, that's not to take away from those individual heartfelt teachers that are doing all they can with what they can, and the individuals in the system. There's lots of beautiful, beautiful people with great intentions. But I am going to villainize, especially being a citizen here in Oregon, the public, quote unquote, public institutionalized government education system. Yes, we're going to critique probably the crap out of that today, and I want to be fine with that. So I want to say, man, it's already broken. The
Yeah.
AI is not
Yeah.
breaking it; AI is exposing it. Okay, and I think that's where I want to kind of delineate that. This academic integrity crisis that we're kind of talking about isn't that students are using AI to answer questions, is that we're still asking questions that an AI can answer easily. Okay. So
Yeah.
like we can dive into wherever you want, but yeah, man, I think it's actually exposing the cracks. And for the very first time, well, let me rephrase that. For decades, we've been having this marketing slogan about personalized learning, personalized teaching.
Mhm.
But AI is the first technology we can actually deliver on that promise, and we can personalize the process of learning, not just the content. So I'm excited to have this conversation.
Me too, man. Me too. I'm looking forward to your insight. I think the biggest note really is to understand that if AI included or not, like what should we stop teaching? What becomes obsolete? What becomes more important to teach? I guess in essence, in this AI world, in terms of like what sets the standard and where we're at from a societal standpoint, I don't think, let's just kind of put that to the side because you and I think our beliefs are very aligned on that part. So if we were to just specifically talk about AI, and yeah, the bar is kind of set pretty low, and so it's answering questions that we already know the answers to. It's not really, it's kind of not necessarily deviating from the norm. It's how do we raise the standard, and how can we use AI to make ourselves smarter and help our children become more intelligent and in this ever growing accelerated technology
All
that we live
right.
in.
Well, so the structure of the system is built on a 19th century factory model of standardized outputs. So,
Yep.
AI is the first scalable technology that we can kind of break that model and build a system that values the individual nature of each and every student, the individual curiosities over mass compliance. And I'll just say that the goal, as I see it, is no longer to have the answer. The goal is to be able to understand how to ask the right question. But our entire assessment model is built on the exact opposite premise of having the answer and still involved in memorizing. And so I know I'm making some broad brush, statements like this. And again, I'm going to have a conversation around the statistical norms and not fringe cases where we have advanced students and great teachers and sort of these Montessori schools or charter schools and whatnot. I'm talking about the bulk of the system. And I think that's a fair way to have this conversation because
Yeah.
is the most of the machine of that's causing most problems, honestly. So that's kind of, we can talk about challenging the structure of the system. We can talk about challenging the role of the educator, We can, you can challenge the AI is cheating narrative, all in this conversation today, wherever you want to go from here.
Well, let's kind of touch on like some of the current crisis points because I think that will help transition this conversation and we can fill in the gaps in terms of teacher shortages versus widening the achievement gaps or lowering the potential for creating those achievement gaps. I think the narrative is let's just make the bar so low that anyone can pass. At the same token, I've also seen different educational institutions where just being in a certain district within the same city or state can give you advantages in terms of what they're learning and how quickly they're learning and the types of material that's being conducted. And the opposite end of the spectrum is also true, where you're like, this is stuff that you should have learned, in first grade and second grade, not sixth or seventh. So the high impact actions that you can take as a parent, but also understand that these are our current crisis points because the challenges aren't temporary. They represent structural failures demanding systemic solutions. And I don't know what those solutions are. AI, I just think can be the pivot point for a lot of people, especially a parent that wants their children to accelerate in a society that is not, I don't know, maybe education is just too fragmented and it's archaic, but it's also really fragmented. And to be able to adapt into these learning features of artificial intelligence may be a question for the tail end because there's so many things that we have to address without getting political. But this is all coming from a place of concern and being a parent like yourself.
Yeah, okay. So I founded Huzi directly as a result of my daughter's schoolwork and having a hard time. I shared that story on this podcast before. So the impetus of this whole curiosity for me is around how do we have a technology help us learn more, deeper, faster, in a collaborative way, not to replace my learning process, but to enhance it. And that sounds like a cliche line, but it's literally at the core of how I spend all day, every day. So I think we can ask a couple of sorts of questions that help us kind of get aligned here first. Teachers in the system are given certain benchmarks that they have to pass and teach towards and whatnot. And I just want to start underneath that level. And that is, what are we preparing our kids for? What world are we preparing them for? Are we preparing them for the world that's today or yesterday? And that is obviously what's actually happening. Or are we really looking forward? And if so, how far forward are we looking and who's doing that looking? Who's involved in that looking? Now, different states handle it differently. Oregon's a unique situation because it's actually kind of a political arm of the governor. The governor actually appoints the head of education. It's not a elected position like it is in other states, right? And so there's a fundamental seed of who's deciding the curriculum, why they're deciding the curriculum, and how far out are they deciding the curriculum for. And that should be uncovered in a lot of these conversations. What is the desired result that they want as a result of this? Are they wanting, a society where, like we've had to have in before, Mo, where there's a certain regimented nature to it? People needed to turn out a generation of human beings that wanted to clock in at a certain time and clock out at a certain time, that follow these sorts of rules. And that made sure that we built out this country in a way that milk was delivered on a certain amount of times, that people stopped at a four-way stop even though nobody was around them, but that was the rule, so they had to make that stop, right? That's the sort of society that was being built. Now, I think that we should challenge all of those assumptions. There's cycles and seasons to everything. And I don't think that we're honoring the cycle and season, both where we are as a society, as a country, with the technology, and with the funding that we have available. Funding has a lot to do that drives the whole system. And we're always talking about schools being underfunded. I've looked at the budgets, Mo, of lots of different school districts and seen what percentage of the dollar that's given by taxpayers goes towards management and bureaucracy versus going towards the student. We've also seen that there's not a direct correlation between cost going towards a student and the quality of the education. And so I think there just needs to be this sort of honest reassessment of the seed of our public education system. And now is just the time where we have the ability to highly leverage school district, highly leverage teachers, and highly leverage parents and students to completely transform it. And thank goodness that there is. Have you seen some of the schools, Mo, that are coming out that are now either AI powered or or fundamentally based on a completely different sort of way of teaching students. Have you seen some of these success stories?
I have like collectively, like I was reading about how some of these adaptive like learning paths have been implemented, and they see that
Beautiful.
60% of teachers that have incorporated AI into their regular teaching routines have shown like a 44% increase in just like retention, like which is yeah, it may be negligible in terms of a status point, but I find it to be incredibly important because I mean, how many things have you read that you just don't, you just forget? You know, you have to go over it over and over again. So like being able to summarize information versus actually understanding the information, that's pivotal, especially for a kid. The brains are still forming, they're developing, they don't understand context, you know, just words.
In my
So
family, we talk about what are the important currencies of the future. What is it that is a skill set that you need to have in order to not just have relevance and value, but to be successful in the world? I don't want to have this whole conversation about how do you learn so then you can have an economic value, in society. We are in a capitalist society, and we're talking about America. So there's a lot of value in, your status, the amount of money that you provide, or the amount of money that you can get, and you turn that money over. And I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about as a human being, where you're informed, you're aware, you're empathetic, you're kind, you're loving, you're thoughtful, you're hardworking, you're resourceful, like those sorts of human beings. That's what I'm talking about. And in order to have that lens of the world, it really comes down to some level of agency, some level of resourcefulness,
mhm.
some level of curiosity, and some level of empathy. You sprinkle on top of that the ability to influence, use your words, have discernment and awareness. And now you become superhuman if you give them tools like different AI products that allow them to take this empathetic, discerned, resourceful, curious, loving mind and apply it to the world, right? So I'm not talking about just how quickly can we get people to understanding calculus, or how much of the world history can they ingest when they used to take eighth grade and now they can do that by fourth grade. That's not my points of emphasis for this. It's what is the outcome? What is the product being produced by these school systems? And are these people, when they're coming out of the public school system, well adjusted, kind, hardworking, prepared to be just part of society in that way, not just a cog in the wheel in terms of a mail carrier or a programmer or a doctor or a teacher? We're churning out people to have this sort of misunderstanding of what is fulfilling in life, right? And so
Yep.
there's a self-discovery part of the whole school system that I'd like to like really inflame and really have people focus on that self-discovery part of a young adult growing it. And this isn't to take it away from the parents needing to do this, or their church or their family or whatever, because that is an important part of it. I'm not saying we should offload this to schools, but schools, because they spend such a bulk amount of the time in these institutions, that this could be a huge transformative way to society if we just adjusted just slightly 2 millimeters, a little bit each year at the end of their 12 years that they spend, or 13 years that they spend in public education, not higher education, public education. I just think our society would be so much better served if we just adjusted the end goal a little bit, not on 19th century, paradigm.
1000%. And on that note, do you find that, take budgets out of it? Do you feel like the teacher's perspective, like, do you find that, and I guess in your peer review, would you feel like teachers would find this to be a threat or a tool? Like, is
Totally.
it
I
going to
I
assist them? And
listen.
if it is,
Sorry, Mo. We have a little bit of a delay. I get
no, no,
super
go for it.
fired up when we talk about teachers thinking this is a threat. I hope they do.
Yep.
I hope
What's
that
that?
we get away from tenureship and we get towards, we judge teachers based on not how long have they been a teacher, but how good are they doing. I don't like the idea that you
Boom.
can't fire a teacher after because they've been there for 9 years because there's a teachers union. Who's
Yeah.
that serving
Yeah.
besides the teachers union to collect their dues, and the teachers themselves not serving their class? Right? I don't understand how we've gotten to this place where the teachers union dictates the quality of education coming out of these institutions. I don't like the
It,
fact.
you know, it, go ahead.
No, no, please. I want to hear your question.
I was just going to say, like, it's not just that. I can't tell you with it, my personal experience I've had with some of these educators. You know, you've had some that are just amazing. They want to be there. They show up. You know, they're encouraging. They want to be teachers. They're destined to be teachers. That's
Yeah.
what they're served to do in life, right? On the opposite end of the spectrum, I've had situations where I literally have questioned. I wanted to sit there in front of their face and just say, why are you doing this? One. Two, if this is how you're conversing with me, I can only imagine how you interact with children. And so the things that my kids tell me now are exacerbated because I've been able to witness these things firsthand. It's just like, yeah, like just because you have tenure, so that gives you the right to sit there and continue to do what you're doing. It's mind boggling. Like you are miserable or you are burnt out or this wasn't your path and you got stuck in it. We don't get people's backstory. We don't know what's going on in their life. And it's not for me to judge. However, if you're there to educate and prime minds, then do your job. Otherwise, what the fuck are you doing? I just don't get it.
I think we should be honest to just these aren't not public education institutions. These are government education institutions. They're funded by
Right.
the government,
Yep. Yep.
decided by the government,
Yep.
ruled by the government. The curriculum's created by the government. They're beholden to the government in every single way. So this is not a partnership. Again, a macro state. This is not a public partnership. We've seen over the last 4 or 5 years the challenges of parents wanting to voice like their voice against some of the woke agenda, some of the things that have like eked its way into the government education system because it's a political arm, it's not a public arm, right? And you know, I've spoken, you know, at many of these. I volunteered in schools every year consistently. Me and my wife did, like we were really involved in the schools. I donate my time to the city. We do leadership training. This is couldn't be more important. If you want to be involved in politics, you need to be involved in schools in some way, right? If you want to say I want to, you know, work towards bettering my community, then working, you know, with a school in some way is certainly a great use of your time. So I want to be also clear. I'm not sitting here with any sort of criticism and then having being an armchair quarterback. I've been in the meetings. I've been at the states. I've been, you know, part of these discussions, and time again, the goodwill of the individual teacher is crushed by the system that's not there to support them. At the same time,
1,000.
I should also point out there's a huge shift, especially after COVID, of parental involvement, behavior of kids. Like what happened during the lockdowns completely transformed an entire generation of kids, and the teachers are having to deal with that. Attention to detail, needing to sit, you know, and listen, having parents being less involved than ever before in many cases. So there's a lot going against the individual teacher, and unless the parents either start voting for school choice, things like that, we're not going to
Yeah.
have any sort of change in forward momentum. And unless we have educators that have stopped basing their identity on past successes, you know, and start being honest about the rapid changing world, we are going to have a whole generation of kids that are going to find themselves completely unprepared, not just scholastically, but emotionally, intellectually, every aspect of them. And that is what scares me the most. I didn't know that we were going to talk about this today, but this is I get a little bit wound up because you can see the disconnect between the real world and what's being taught in a textbook that was written 5 years ago
Yep. Yep. Or 50 years ago.
or 50 years ago.
In
You
some
know, like,
instances.
I don't want to make this talk too political, but I don't mind a little bit. But yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of reasons for the way history is taught, you know, and the way math is taught, and the way
Yeah.
we can decide how we want to handle these conversations for this podcast. But you know, let's get back to. I'm going to let you back to give me the questions here.
Let, let's keep it kosher. 'Cause I mean, listen, I don't mind. You know, maybe this is a conversation for another podcast. But I wanted to mention, I literally was on Instagram this morning, scrolling on the interwebs, and this billionaire Jeff Yass donated $100 million to this private university in Austin. So Jeff Yass, billionaire, donated $100 million to this private university in Austin with the hopes to permanently eliminate tuition for kids. They want to support this like $300 million endowment for traditional higher education. His whole thing, I was reading a brief blurb on what he was talking about. I was like, I want to roll the dice and bet on this, because if money is the problem, then let's see what we can do, what we can conjure out of this. And if that's going to motivate the professors, if it's going to motivate the staff, whatever, it's going to enable children that didn't have the advantages or the finances or the resources to get a proper education. And I say proper in quotations. I think that's cool. I think that's a step forward for sure. Just thought of something to mention. It was interesting.
Yeah, I wish money was the problem. It's not proven to be true. You look at
Right.
let's just look at the state of Oregon for a second. It's not last in spending per student, but it's near dead last in the quality of the output. So there is not a direct correlation between the spending per student. It's the system, it's the curriculum, it's the political nature behind it. It's the infection of personal agendas, and toxicity inside of the agenda. There's too much of a me sort of thing with some of these agendas, and there is about the student and the outcomes. So it unfortunately, Mo, it's just not about the money. And I know that's always talked about. Well, we're underfunded. Yes, but if we just look at the quality of the output versus the quality of the money coming in, you would assume that every single time you would see a direct correlation. As the amount of money spent per student went down, so did the results, and that's not true. That is not a fully baked argument or a position to take that we're always underfunded and therefore we have a bad product. That's not
Totally. Yeah. I was just stating on the merit of, from a university standpoint, in the US, I don't know of a university that doesn't cost money. So eliminating that hurdle for people, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah. Next question.
But in terms of AI for education, do you think that there's like an age appropriated use? Like, should kindergartners be using AI as an example? Like, is that, what's appropriate?
Dang.
I kind of phrase this in the way that I would phrase social media. I know.
That's a
I
good
know,
one.
but at the same time, it's not. But you're giving. I mean, it's the internet. It's access to everything.
So the question was, what is an age-appropriate method to hand kids AI? Well, certainly I wouldn't hand ChatGPT, over in that way. It's not. I want to make sure we're defining AI. I'm not talking about defining as giving them Gemini or a Copilot or ChatGPT or even Huzi. What I'm talking about is constrained, trained, guided, vetted, compliance-oriented, age-appropriate assistance. That's what I'm talking about. So
Yeah, with the education on literacy as well for AI. Yeah.
yeah, I think so because we've confused the delivery of information with the act of teaching. AI is taking over the information delivery, so we're kind of being forced to rediscover what teaching actually is, right? So you can give AI to be the information delivery system. You don't need a teacher necessarily for that. But the new literacy isn't reading or writing or arithmetic. I think it's the ability to prompt, to question, and to creatively partner with an intelligent system of some sort. Okay. So I think we're talking about a transformation of the definition of literacy. And that takes a whole village to make that transformation. So as an example, like we can redefine success a little bit even in the home, whereas a lot of parents are trained, when our kids come home and we ask, well, what did you learn in school today? And that's a kind of a typical conversation that parents and students have. And we can maybe pivot that a little bit. And we should be asking something like, what great questions did you ask today?
Ooh, I like that.
And
Very
so
cool.
these pivots of redefining success don't have to just fall on the shoulders of teachers. We can have as a community leaders, as coaches, as parents, we can realize that your future employer doesn't care about the Battle of Hastings, right? But it definitely does care of your ability to understand, well, how did that impact, pricing today or social media today or your place in the world today, whatever it is. Like you can transform this sort of emphasis of what's important. And I think that can start with just those little shifts of, instead of what did you learn today, is what great questions did you ask today? We plant different seeds in their mind and they understand there's different emphasis of focus. And the kids just start recognizing that. But they don't do that by telling them. The kids make shifts by mirroring and watching their teachers perform in a different way. They watch their siblings perform in a different way, watch their parents perform in a different way. You can't tell your kid to go read if you yourself are just going to sit on social media and scroll. So
Yep.
we do have to provide that leadership, and they, man, they watch everything. You got kids, they watch everything. They watch everything that you do. I didn't even realize how much my son watched me until now he's a young adult in his own. I'm watching him. I'm like, oh my God, okay, he does that. He says this. He wears this. He thinks this way because he was just watching me all these years. I didn't sit down and it was just, he was observant. He absorbed. And, that's a little scary at times, but man, they take in everything. These kids are so smart and capable, and we try and contain it
Oh,
because
yeah.
we have our own projections. And so whenever I work with especially high school youth, I am constantly impressed by how smart they are, by how capable they are, by how motivated they are. I'm impressed by how much desire they actually have inside of them, if only they had a ladder to climb, or a lattice to work upon, or a mentor to follow, or a path to explore. Given some clarity, they are just so capable as a generation. So you're never going to hear me talk poorly about generations below us, like it's pretty common, because we're the ones that made it. We're the ones that contributed to it. We're the ones that raised them. They're our kids. So it's like, if there's any fault in them, it's ours. But anyways,
Yeah. I never understood that notion. I always felt that if I did my job right, if you're better than me in all regards, however you want to interpret that. And that should be the outcome. You should groom the next generation to be better. However, and better may not be the word to use. Pick a placeholder, but anyways, I'm with you. Let's kind of fast forward a little bit to universities. I thought this was an interesting one. Much like a lot of like tools that access, like college students, they have either a free access to something like a tool or what have you, or they have a discounted access, right? Do you feel that, excuse me, college students should have unrestricted access to AI while they're in university?
for sure, without a question, not even a fraction of a pause in me with that one. Now, of course, does it just need to be Gemini or ChatGPT or something like that? But it needs to be
Right.
topic specific, appropriate. Let's check all those boxes first. But it would be like asking a modern pilot to learn to fly without having a flight simulator.
Yeah,
That's what you're asking kids to do.
doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Makes zero sense to say, oh well, we're in writing class, we're in history class, so it'd be like teaching math without a calculator these days. AI is going to touch their lives in every way at some level. So we wouldn't want to put a pilot behind a wheel without putting him in a flight simulator first. So why should that even be a question of sorts of should we be giving AI, especially in college? It's mandatory.
You know what's funny? Coming up with the research, that was a question that was actually popping up quite often. I thought that was interesting. That's why I wanted to ask it, because there was a lot of debate on that specific question, that topic. And the fear, from what I can gather in the Reddit webs, is that it is typically a parental concern, not a child or student's concern. It's like what you fear what you don't understand. That's why the whole idiom ignorance is bliss works well for so many people, but to me it's like a prison.
It's so true. Of course, like parents, God, this sounds judgmental, but a lot of parenting's done from projection. Your own personal experience, or your
Oh
own
yeah.
what you did have or you didn't have, or what you understand or what you don't
Guilty.
understand.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not saying I'm immune to that, but that's, of course, the seed of that discussion just comes from an uneducated standpoint. I'm gonna make one more comment, I think, about the cheating kind of narrative. Like
Yeah.
they're trying to cheat or treat AI like it's some sort of plagiarism machine. Thinking of it as, oh,
Yeah.
it's a hack towards the answer. We should be treating it as a personalized Socratic tutor for every student. It's not a plagiarism machine unless that's how you use it. Okay. So people that have that intuition, like, oh, we can't give it to kids because that's how they're going to cheat. That is an absolute projection. Not every student thinks of it that way. I promise. My daughter, when she uses AI, She uses it as a personalized tutor. So she'll open up our Canvas product. She'll add a persona that's her microbiology tutor. She'll add her microbiology textbook onto the Canvas. She'll add the YouTube video from the class that they had or the lecture they were supposed to watch or whatever, because a lot of education is about watching videos these days. She'll add that to the board, and
Mm-hmm.
within less than 10 seconds, she has a micro PhD level tutor for her at her fingertips to help her understand the nuances of every single answer. It's not a cheating machine for her. Right.
Inviting yeah, I think it's phenomenal. I was just saying it's especially nowadays. Like I have my kids. I've got an older kid in nursing school, but then I've got little ones that are in middle school, and they just have these tablets. And there's a big disconnect between actual help and explanation, and like, here you go. These are your assignments. Boom. And there's very little context. And I'm not saying all classes, but a good majority of them. Even in the assignments, there's no instructions. There's really no context. They're just expected to know. Being able to pop up Canvas like that in that specific situation and input all that data and create a micro tutor with PhD level where they could actually ask it questions like it's a teacher in the classroom. How is that not beneficial? Like,
Yeah.
how isn't that amazing? And how is that cheating? You know?
I could make the really easy argument that AI is the absolute best thing that ever happened to teachers. It can automate or augment the administrative busy work. It can help with all the things that burn them out behind the scenes and allow them to do the one thing that AI can't, and that's care deeply about the little human being that's sitting in their classroom. That understands they just got picked
Yep.
on the in the lunchroom, or that they had a bad day, or that they're wearing the same sweatshirt for 2 weeks in a row. Maybe there's something happening at home, things like that. The human nature of it. I think that the great teachers understand this is a blessing that can free them up because they can use AI and a lot of their back busy work stuff to do the human stuff that the AI can't. And this is the kind of thing that I think the great teachers are really leaning into, is that part of it. It's not just the curriculum side of it, it's also for the teacher to use in a way.
That's such a critical point. I didn't even think about that. Being able, it allows them to focus on the human side of things that AI cannot complete. It takes
Yep.
care of the mundane, not to say that it's mundane, but it takes care of the stuff that it can take care of. And you can actually be, it's not even a, I don't even know if it's a, like, I remember to this day, I'm 40 years old. Some of the most important people in my life were educators. And they weren't the ones that taught me the most. They were the ones that cared the most, you know? So
But
I
that's a
think that's really
really
important.
great way of reframing it, Mo. I like that. So they weren't the ones that taught you the most, they're the ones that cared for you the most. Yeah, that's nice.
Oh, yeah.
AI can give the illusion of it caring for you, but there's nobody home. There's nobody there. It's just an algorithm spitting that out, and it will fool some people, but it doesn't have the empathy of a great teacher or the intuition of a great professor of how to phrase things or assist them in a way. So a lot of the conversation is about what is it doing to students, and I think we can shift a lot of it to what is it doing to the administration. How are public education systems using it to lower their overhead? How are public education systems, leveraging it, internally to be able to not have so much bureaucracy, so more of the money that's coming in goes right towards the student themselves and not towards middle management and red tape and bureaucracy layers. These are like internally inside of school districts, they should be having all sorts of efficiency discussions, automation discussions, augmentation discussions internally to save the taxpayer dollar of being wasteful and just being more efficient and thoughtful and personalized. I haven't seen a lot of headlines or discussions around that. And if I could plant the seed out there, administrators, school district, employees, teachers really push on that school district to make sure they're leveraging AI internally to lower the cost of serving each student dramatically, so you can hire more human beings that can lower the classroom count of students, that can increase the amount of technology that we can give them, better devices, better quality of food in the schools. These are all things that we could do instead of wasting it on middle management bureaucracy layers inside of school districts.
Yeah. And I think a big part of that is the literacy aspect. I remember when I was a kid, you learned how to type, you improved your typing speed, and then there was computer literacy, So you understood basic functionality. I think I was using one of the original Macs, and most of the time we end up playing. What was that game? The Oregon Trail.
Oh
But
man, I love. Did you get
remember that?
dysentery?
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that game.
I think it was my objective for a while to see how many I could just starve. It's stupid. But I was going to say, I've noticed like my 11-year-olds, my sixth graders right now, they have yet to learn any kind of literacy regarding not only computers but just typing. They don't even know how to use a keyboard. Like I have to teach them that, you know.
It's like
So
cursive.
it's like I feel like we're regressing. Yeah, we're regressing, and well, that should be a pivotal point in our society. Number one. Number two, the next thing that we should be teaching them is AI literacy. And it should be now. Like it should be at the very latest, it should be introduced in middle school. So
Well,
like, I don't know.
on
Go ahead.
that point, you mentioned, like there was a hint of teachers worry about being unreliable, or it makes things up, or it can't be trusted. Right? There's a little bit of hint in that. I hear that
Yeah.
all the time. I'm saying that AI, the fact that AI is sometimes wrong, is actually the single most powerful feature for education, because it turns every student into a mandatory fact checker. It teaches them that by
Right.
necessity to be critical consumers of information in a world that's just full of information. So if you really properly understand, like if we really are using it, then they are increasing their critical discernment. They're looking at all the information and running it through fact checking, instead of just saying, "Hey, you're an authority. I'll believe anything that you tell me." Both to AI or to teachers, we need to like lean into the fact that AI sometimes is wrong, and teach students how to sniff that out, fact check, be resourceful, and then correct it when necessary, just like they should in the real world.
I think that's important. I also think that because of the fear, just like, but here's the thing, man, like everybody's fear of technology. I remember, I mean, how much resistance was there when, computer literacy became a thing, right? And it became mandatory. Like you had to learn how to use a computer. Someone that grew up on a typewriter didn't want to learn how to use a computer. It was this whole thing, and then the next generation, all they knew is computers. Generation after that, all they knew is mobile phones. And after that is this, and so on and so forth, right? It's always going to be a hurdle to overcome. I just don't know, nor do I understand why the resistance to technology when this is just part of our history. This is anytime something is introduced, we learn it so that we can adapt. Because I think as a species, that's probably our greatest trait.
Keep totally, like we're talking about human as a species and all that. I hear a lot of ideas floating around that AI will kill creativity in the student. Right, all the students will start sounding the same because they're all getting robotic sort of answers, and they can regurgitate those answers, or they don't need to be creative and they're losing it because they're just relying on the AI. When cameras were invented, painters panicked.
Yeah.
They thought, who will need a portrait painter when a machine can capture this perfect likeness in just mere seconds? But camera didn't kill painting. In fact, it didn't even kill creativity. It liberated it. It freed painters from the burden of finding this perfected realism, and they started exploring impressionism, cubanism, modern art. Right, the painters started focusing on all the things that the camera couldn't capture: the abstract, the emotional, the purely creative things. And so, if you didn't look at history, that could be an easy assumption to make. But we can look back at what human
Right.
beings did as a pivot as a result of things like the camera and painting, and you can see it actually pushed humans to be more creative. So, I just don't think that you can make statements like that and just be so an absolute and not have any sort of look at history and the evolution of human beings. How do we get here? How do we even come to the fact that we invented AI in the first place? Because we're a creative
Right.
species.
Is there anything specific on education? And I'm sure this is going to come up again in more future conversations, but is there anything specifically that you want to touch on?
If I were to talk to parents for a minute just about the idea, first of all, I think parenthood is the best gift I've ever personally been given, or the best honor to be involved in. I know you feel the same way, Mo, and lots of people that are listening to this do feel the same way. And if that's true, then we do have to learn how to get out of our own way, and realize that these children are on their own paths in a new world that we didn't live in. And so making too many assumptions about what their future is going to look like because we had a particular trajectory or path has to be really avoided now more than ever before, because the future has never been more unclear what's going to look like. I'm 51 now. When I was in high school, you could pretty much see 5 to 10 years in the future and have a decent understanding of what it's going to look like, what it's going to feel like, what's
Yeah.
going to be important to know. We don't have that clear lens today. And so putting too much of our thoughts of our personal life experience and then trying to inject that into your kid is going to be something that I think is going to cause a lot of friction. So kind of getting out of our own way as a parent and realizing that our lived experience is going to be so radically different than their lived experience at whatever age you look back into yourself. It's really important to find a way to bring that into your parenting style some way, not like figure out that you've walked these footsteps in front of them and so there's a path clear in some way. The path looks so dramatically different for our kids than it did for us. And there hasn't been a generation that has faced such uncertainty as this generation. What's the job market going to look like? What's the economics going to look like? What's even important? Are we just going to have universal basic income? So is this important at all? Should I just go buy a van and live down by the river, and get a check from daddy government because robots are going to be doing my jobs? These are all things that people are really talking about today. And I don't see that world happening, by the way. There's a lot of talk about that. I don't see that, at least in our lifetime. But I just a message to parents about being more pliable than we ever thought we had to be in leading our kids is pretty important.
It's a thoughtful thing, and it is also can be concerning. And I'm sure the thought has crossed our mind. And you're right, we live in the future it can be unsettling because it is probably the most uncertainty that I personally have faced. I mean, I always have these thoughts in my mind, like, I don't even know what the world's going to look like in 20 years. Like, what am I sending my kids into? So anyways, all right. Thank you for that. Let's try to do this rapid fire to the best of my ability. So I'm going to start with the most ridiculous one, which is, should ChatGPT be banned in schools?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe ChatGPT as a brand, but not an AI chat assistant in any way. Yeah, I think that's the most closed-minded, uneducated position to have, is to just simply ban AI in schools. That's a ridiculous premise. There's no way you could support that anyway. There's no way that's good for the children. There's no way that's good for the school district. There's no way that's good for the teachers. So absolutely open up in a thoughtful, well organized way and watch what happens to the school district that does this the best. It will crush.
Awesome. Not awesome that's going to crush. It's awesome through your response. I appreciate that. I thought it was going to go a whole nother way. All right, next question. Will AI replace teachers?
I hope it replaces the mediocre ones and down. I hope it replaces the bottom, fourth, and third quartile for sure. I hope that school districts find a way to leverage the best teachers, the ones that are most caring and thoughtful and smart teachers, the ones that understand that this is a community effort. These aren't their kids in their classroom and try and take possession of the things, that they collaborate with parents, they collaborate with community, collaborate with the business community, collaborate with the spiritual community, if that makes sense for their school. But yeah, I hope it disrupts the shitty teachers and they go find another job. Absolutely.
Cool. Have you seen an exciting education AI based platform
Oh man, I cannot
outside
remember
of
the name of it. Yeah, outside of Huzi, you can. I'm actually talking to like a state entrepreneurship program for high school about Huzi and a few fun things, but not a platform itself. Yes, and there are a bunch of them now, Mo. I'm not schooled up on the names of those, but there is a particular school district. After this, I can follow up with you, that has this kind of AI powered school where they're essentially chunking down the curriculum into 2 hours of time, because
That's
it's
so
personalized
cool.
AI generated. They spend the full school day at the school, but then the other parts of the school is really, really leaning into home ec, really leaning into mechanical, really leaning into they're starting their own business in the sixth grade, really leaning into art and sports and physical education and those sorts of things. So they're taking the academic curriculum, being able to synthesize it into a couple of hours of the day that used to take 6 to 7. And so they're spending the rest of the time on life skills. I think it's beautiful and the results are incredible. Let's go back to how they came to be. So colleges and universities did not used to be the thing that happened right after high school. Higher education was reserved for those that had graduated from basic education, went into the world, learned, had a job, produced value, had some income, had some life skills, some experience, and then they made a decision to continue to invest in themselves and go to higher education years later. Colleges and universities and realized, oh, that's a bad business model. We could get way more money if we bolted it right on, right after high school and sold the story that the way to get prepared for the future is only if you come through our $100,000, $200,000, course. You're forced to leave school. Parents have to pay for your another car, another plane ticket, another rent, separate utilities. It was an academic. It was an economic play, not an academic one. So just the whole birth of higher education has been completely twisted from what it was originally made for. It was made for the people that had a little bit of something. They knew what they wanted to study, where they wanted to go in life, right? Because they had grown up a little bit after high school. So the current form of higher education is a completely manipulated form of what it was actually intended for from the very beginning, if you look back at history a little bit. So I hope that there's a kind of revisiting of what is higher education meant to do, what's the purpose of it, and it doesn't have an economic purpose. It has more of a real world purpose and a personal purpose than it does currently.
Thank you for educating me. I think that it's like, oh, that model just makes so much sense. Because if you think about life skills, like what do we go through? We don't know what we're going to end up. And you're not the same person you were at 20 when you're 30. Even like 26, 27, you're not the same person. That's a drastic change in personality and belief system, life experience, all that stuff. And to go back to, like, I know people that go back to school in their 40s, completely change careers and just dominate life because they just know who they are. They know what they like. They know what they want. Being able to be able to craft that expertise and be specified or have a specified outcome based off of that, I think is phenomenal.
If we could solve the problem of too later in life, you realize that you get old too early and wise too late. If somehow we could solve that problem early in life for people, that'd be amazing. And unfortunately, I am burnt. I have the same sort of burnt vibes that you do about the way that society just feels like it tries to just wring you dry. I just feel like content creators feel like wring dry because you got to play the algorithm. Everything about, like, so we're being sold something 3,000 to 5,000 times every day by an ad, a pop-up, a grill, a billboard, a notice, an email, like 3,000 to 5,000 times every single day. You're essentially being asked for money in some way, right? Exposed in that way. Everywhere you look around. So this feeling of just being wrung out is something that I would love us to put some stopgaps in place for. I don't have the answer to that, Mo, but I do think that a personalized, thoughtful adjustment of our entire public education system is decades overdue. And they're simply not pawns. These children are not political pawns. These children are not economic pawns where we can say, hey, I'm going to bleed the community dry because we're going to tug on your heartstrings and say we just need more money for the schools. And the problem is we need more money, and that's why our results are low. Those are all bullshit, responses. I'm hopeful that there's enough parents, teachers, educators, administrators that realize that today's government system is not just inept, but it's corrupt, and especially in the state of Oregon. And I hope that anybody, in government that hears this and does something with that and gets involved and demands real, immediate, and concrete change.
It was the best way to end this thing. Thank you so much for your insight.
It's fun.
As always, it's always so thoughtful and it comes from decades of experience and expertise. So thank you so much for coming on the show. Next week, we're going to have you back on again. I'm hoping because we're going to talk about how AI and is in, specifically in the work system, how the future of jobs and employment, and there's a big discrepancy, there's a big fear, there's just a giant question mark hanging over everybody's heads. And I think that it's very imperative for us to kind of explore that a little bit and give some insight, especially, you yourself being founder and owner of an artificial intelligence company, what that looks like in terms of what you're looking for, what's sought after. I think that's very imperative to be able to discuss. So again, thank you so much, buddy. And I hope you have an amazing rest of your week.
Go crush it, man.
Thanks, bud.